Hello everyone and welcome back. So you've returned for our second study of Judges. I'm glad to see you back. I didn't scare you off with that super long study yesterday. Let's jump in right away so we can make it through this one maybe in about 5 minutes. Our first section, our new section, is the judges that are featured in this chapter. And you'll see that none of the judges are highlighted, and that's because we're not quite there yet. Chapter 3 will be introduced to 3 of those judges, but not so much in this chapter. As I mentioned in the last study, chapters 1 and 2 are really the linking chapters, connecting the story between Joshua and Judges. I think really the meat of the book of Judges starts in chapter 3 and moves on until chapter 21, which is the last chapter. And I should mention, if you don't have this PDF, you can get it on our website for free, and there's a link down in the description. Okay, when did these events happen in the history of the world? Most scholars place the period of the Judges between the years 1450 BC and 1000 BC. There is some debate about that. If you want more information on that, you can watch Judges chapter 1. But almost everybody places it between 1450 and 1000, somewhere in there. And as we mentioned last time, this book covers several hundred years of Israelite history. The beginning of Judges chapter 2, this chapter specifically, actually steps back in time to back in time before Joshua dies, to take a look at the moral state of the Israelite nation. Taking a look at our map now in our where section, we're going to talk about an encounter that the Israelites had with the angel of the Lord. Now, the angel of the Lord spoke to the people at a place called Bochum, which is not on the map. I'm not sure if anyone knows exactly where that place was, but that's where we're told it happened. Talk about that in the outline section. The second half of the chapter, the events talked about there occurred all throughout the land of Israel, so pretty much the entire map is relevant. And now for our character section, we've got 2 ones to highlight. First one, Joshua. Now, technically Joshua died at the end of the book of Joshua, but as we mentioned, we're stepping back in time here. So Joshua was the leader of the Israelites. He led them on the conquest of the Promised Land, and he was the leader who took charge after Moses. We're also going to talk about a really interesting character here, the angel of the Lord. This messenger appeared to the people of Israel and rebuked them for breaking covenant with God, for not following through with the instructions that God had given them, and in throwing out all of the pagan nations that lived in the Promised Land. Now, many believe that this angel, which angel just, I think, means messenger, that this messenger was actually God himself. There's several reasons to believe that. There's several appearances of this individual known as the angel of the Lord, and especially when we get to Gideon's story, the story of Gideon, the angel of the Lord is definitely God himself. So some people think that was the case here as well. The language that the angel uses, if you actually go and read the text, which hopefully you have, points to the fact that he himself is God. So I'll let you go down that rabbit hole in another time. So let's talk about this angel of the Lord appearing in verses 1 through 5. This is our first section, the rebuke of the angel of the Lord. So I kind of already covered this, but the angel of the Lord appears to the Israelites at a place called Bochum, and he rebuked them for breaking their covenant with God. God had specifically commanded the people not to make peace with the pagan nations, not to intermarry with them, not to live among them. They were supposed to tear down all their pagan places and idolatrous places of worship, and the Israelites had not obeyed. And so the angel of the Lord told the people that these remaining pagan nations would become thorns and snares to them, and that God would not aid them in defeating these foreign nations in the future if they continued in this rebellion. In response, Israel did have a penitent heart, but we'll see that the nation didn't follow through on that. So they offered sacrifices and they wept, and so they were at least for a while repentant about that. But the rest of the book tells a different story. We know that their penitence at least lasted until the death of Joshua. So in verses 6 through 10, we have the death of Joshua's generation. So the people of Israel served the Lord faithfully, were obedient to him all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who were familiar with Joshua, who had lived contemporary with Joshua, and who had seen the mighty works of God, the miracles that God had done for the Israelites. But after Joshua's generation died, or as the text says, were gathered to their fathers, a new generation of Israelites arose that didn't respect God. And now our final section, verses 11 through 23. And this is a really important one to pay attention to because it's going to be relevant for the rest of the book. The cycle of sin and restoration in the book of Judges. So the last section of Judges 2 introduces us to a pattern that's going to be repeated throughout the book. For the next several centuries, the Israelites would fall into a cycle of abandoning God, being punished by God, repenting of their rebellion against God and their sins, and then being restored by God through his representatives, the judges. So here's the cycle. I kind of wrote it down in its 4-step process. Number 1, the Israelites abandon God and worship idols, and the relevant verses are there on the PDF. Second, God withdraws his blessings from Israel and allows Israel's enemies to subjugate them. Step number 3, Israel repents and cries to God for help. Number 4, God mercifully sends a judge to deliver the people from their enemies. So we're just write that pattern down. If you want to make a mental note of it, we're going to see it again and again and again. So that is Judges chapter 2. It's the introduction really to the book. Now we'll meet our first judges in the next chapter. And now for our application section. My camera says I have 1 minute and 50 seconds to get through this, so I'm just going to have to read it. Here we go. In times of hardship and formation, people are typically much more dependent on God, and you've probably seen that. Motorcycles, ugh. Okay, in times of hardship and formation, people are typically much more dependent on God. In times of ease, people tend to forget about God and not be nearly reliant on him. Now this plays out on a national level and on a personal level. The Israelites relied on God when their nation was in formation, but then when they received their blessings, they settled in their homes and life got comfortable and they forgot about God. You know, in the United States, in the nation that I grew up in, the writings of the Founding Fathers express their dependence on God's providence in creating a new nation. But in the 21st century, you hardly ever hear any politicians make any kind of meaningful reference to God, or, barely even acknowledge the existence of God. When we as individuals go through times of formation and struggle, we tend to remember the importance of God's intervention in the outcome of our circumstances. But when times are easy, what happens? When life gets comfortable, we tend to give very little thought to God's role in our lives. So here's something that we need to keep in mind and we need to be striving for. One of the marks of spiritual maturity is consistent dependence on and devotion to God through all of life's circumstances. Whether life is easy and comfortable or whether it's hard, we need to realize that we need God through all of those times. So that is Judges chapter 2. I've got 18 seconds left on my memory card here. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, Lord willing, for Judges chapter 3.